We're learning Daf Yomi. We're up to the end of Daf Yudalad Amud Bet 14b, and in order to catch up with Daf Yomi, we're a little behind here. I'm just going to read the Hebrew, the original Mishnah and Gemara in the Lashon of the Talmud, and I'm going to read the excellent translation of the Koren Talmud Bavli of Rav Steinsaltz. V'akati Shlomo Gazar, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, B'sha'ah shetiken Shlomo eruvin etil yadayim, v'stabat kol v'amra, Beni, im chacham libecha, yismach libi gam ani. Chacham beni v'samach libi v'shiva chorfi davar. Ata Shlomo Gazar l'kodshi. Atu inhu v'gazru af l'truma. The Gemara asks further. Still, the matter is not clear, as the decree of the hands of washing hands was an issue by King Solomon, and as Rabbi Yehuda said, that Shmuel said, at the time that Solomon instituted the ordinances of eruv and washing hands to purify them from their impurity, a divine voice emerged and said in his praise, "My son, if your heart is wise, my heart will be glad, even mine." And also there's another pasuk in Mishle, "My son, be wise and make my heart glad, that I may respond to those who taunt me." So the Gemara responds, came Solomon, decreed impurity on the hands to prohibit contact with consecrated items, and Shammai and Hillel and their disciples came and decreed impurity on hands even to prohibit contact with truma. So that's the resolution of what we said before about why do we need Beit Shammai to make a gezerah that you can't touch truma unless you don't netilas yadayim. So the answer is that the Solomon didn't actually decree it on truma. He made a general decree, and the specific decree came from Beit Shammai. Gufa Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Shmonesar Gazru Shmonesar Nechleku V'atanya Hushvu Bo Bayom Nechleku L'machar Hushvu. And the matter itself that was mentioned above in passing, Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said with regard to 18 matters they decreed decrees on that day, and with regard to those 18 matters they disagreed prior to that. The Gemara asks, wasn't it taught in a Braita that they reached a consensus in their opinions with regards to the 18 decrees? The answer, on that day they disagreed, and the following day, after the matter was decided as a vote, they reached a consensus to their opinions. Gufa, Amar Rav Huna, Bishlosha Mekomot Nechleku Shammai v'Hillel. Shammai omer mikav chala, v'Hillel omer mikabayim, v'chachamim omrim, lo kedivre zeh v'lo kedivre zeh, ela, kav u'mechze chayav b'chala. Misha higdilu hamidus amru chameshet revayim kema chayavin b'chala, v'Rabbi Yossi omer chamisha pturin v'chamisha asar chayavin. And to the matter itself that was mentioned above in passing, Rabbi Yehuda said Shammai and Hillel disagreed in 3 places. The Gemara cites these disputes. One, Shammai said from a kav of dough one is required to separate challah, the portion of the dough given to the priest. From anything less than that measure there is no obligation to separate challah, as that is not the measure alluded to in the verse, the first of your dough in Numbers 15. That was written with regard to the mitzvah separating challah. So Hillel says one must separate challah only from 2 kav. How much is a kav? Well, anyhow, a hin is 12 log, which are 3 kav. So 9 kav are 36 log. So the measure of a complete ritual bath, which holds 40 seh, is 960 log, and the measure of a log is between 240 and 480 milliliters. That doesn't tell me about how much the kav is. Okay, we need to find out exactly how much a kav is. So, and Hillel said one must separate challah only from 2 kav. And the rabbis say the halacha is neither in accordance with the statement of this one, which is stringent, nor in accordance with that statement of that one, which is lenient. Rather, 1.5 kav is the measure from which one is obliged to separate challah. So it's a good sized amount of dough. Once the measures increased and the sages recalculated the volume of a kav to be greater, they said that based on the measure of the new kav, 5/4 of a kav of flour is the measure from which one is obligated to separate challah. Rabbi Yossi says 5/4 are exempt Only from dough the size of 5 quarters and a bit more is one obligated to separate challah. How much is a kav? I'll put it in the comments. V'idach Hillel Omer Molohin Mayim She'uvim Poslim et Mikvah. Shechayav Adam Lomar Bilashon Rabo. Shammai Omer Tisha Kabin V'Chacham Omrim Lo K'div Rezeh V'Lo K'div Rezeh. Ad Sheba'u Shnei Gadriim Ad Sheba'u Shnei Gadriim Mishar Hashpa Sheberushalayim Ve'Idu Mishum Shmayev Avtalion Sheshlosha Lugin Mayim She'uvin Poslim et Mikvah V'Kaimu Chachamim et Divrehem. And another dispute between Hillel and Shammai. There's a Hillel says the full hin, in other words 12 log of drawn water. How much is a hin again? A hin is 12 log, which equals 3 kav. 9 kav or 36 log. So the measure of a complete ritual bath holds 40 seah, is 960 log. In other words, somewhere between 240 and 480, either 240 or 480, or perhaps, according to another shita, I don't know, milliliters of water. So, again, another Hillel and Shammai. Hillel says a full hin, 12 log of drawn water poured into a ritual bath in which there was not yet a full measure of 40 seah disqualifies the water of the ritual bath and accords even the water that had been there previously the status of drawn water, mayim she'uvim. Even if the water for a ritual bath is subsequently added to complete the measure of the 40 seah, the ritual bath remains unfit for immersion. In other words, you put mayim she'uvim back in, it puzzles it. Hillel used the biblical measure of a hin because when quoting one's teacher, a person must speak, he must employ the language of his teacher exactly. The greatest example, this is an aside, not written anywhere, just from my memory, that the greatest example of this was probably Rabbi Eliezer, who said a number of times, I did not ever say anything that I did not receive from my masters. He was, I guess you could say, an arch conservative in this respect. He didn't invent anything of his own. And, well, this is another story. So, but the point is that a person must, if he learns something, learns Torah, learns halacha, he can't just say it the way he wants to say it, he has to say it the way his Rav said it, or his teacher said it. So, the rabbis say, Shammai says 9 kav of water is enough to disqualify the ritual bath. And the rabbis say the halacha is neither in accordance with the statement of this one, nor in accordance with the statement of that one. The sages did not determine a measure for the water disqualifying a ritual bath until 2 weavers came from the dung gate in Jerusalem and testified in the name of Shemaiah and Avtalion that 3 log of drawn water disqualifies the ritual bath. And the rabbis upheld their statements against the opinion of the great sages of Israel, Hillel and Shammai. The Gemara emphasized their occupation in the place they lived to underscore that despite the fact that their occupation was, it says they're despised, but really not such I wouldn't say despised, to say it was just a simple occupation. You don't, some guy who works in the gas station comes and quotes you a halacha, you might be a little suspicious, right? So the sages emphasized the fact that their occupation was quote unquote despised and their place was contemptible. So that despite all of this, there's no preferential treatment when it comes to Torah. If the guy in the gas station quotes you halacha and that's the correct halacha, you listen to it because he's saying the right thing. So weavers here. What do you mean from the dung gate? Some say that the dung gate, they have the kotel. Oh, sorry, you might call it the koisel. It doesn't matter. The kotel in the old city, the gate right by the kotel is called the dung gate, sharash ba'od, because they used to throw out the refuse from that area. So Rav Steinsaltz writes, some say that the dung gate, according to variant reading based on the language of the Bible, dung's gate in the plural, was a place where they stored weapons such as quivers or arrows, like ashpa. It's not necessarily refuse. The ashpa in the biblical language means a quiver of arrows, like in Tillim. So from the language of the Tosefta, it appears that the dung gate was close to the city dump, or perhaps it was the exit through which the city's trash was removed. Incidentally, it was also outside there in hell, Geben Hinnom around there. That's where they used to do capital punishment. The 4 kinds of capital punishment in the occasional times that they actually did carry that out. That was out there, so that's perhaps another connection. So, Be'idach, Shammai Omer, Kol Hanashim Dayan Sha'atan, V'Hillel Omer, Mipkida V'Kida, V'Afilu Yamim Marbeh, V'Chacham Omrim, Lo Ketiv V'Zeh, V'Lo Ketiv V'Zeh, Ele Me'et La'et, Mama'et Me'et La'et, Mama'et Al Yad Mipkida L'Pkida, Mipkida L'Pkida, Mama'et Al Yad Me'et La'et. Another dispute between Hillel and Shammai is that Shammai says, all women at their time is sufficient. I.e., a woman who notices she saw blood of menstruation but didn't feel the flow beforehand, she doesn't need to worry that perhaps the flow of blood began before she saw it, as it is sufficient as she assumes ritual purity status began at that moment. She can make that assumption. In other words, back then in those times, it wasn't just permitted to her husband, it was also a law of Tuma and Tara. In other words, if she had touched a spoon like a day before or something, she need not say, "Oh, there's a spoon, hubby. I think it's tameh." It's enough just before. If she didn't feel it and then she notices the blood, she can assume that that's the moment when the impurity started, and she doesn't have to worry about taras before that. Hillel says from examination to examination. That is, a woman who saw blood, but if she does not know when the menstrual flow began, she is considered impure retroactive to the last time she examined herself and found herself to be ritually pure. Hillel's more machmir, right? And even if the examination took several days earlier, anything that she touched in the interim becomes ritually impure. And the rabbis say the halacha is neither in accordance with the statement of this nor the statement of that, or rather, the principle is a full day, 24 hours, reduces the time from examination to examination. That is to say, if her final self-examination took place a long time before, she need only concern herself with ritual impurity for the 24-hour period prior to noticing the blood. And from examination to examination, the lashon mipikida l'fikida reduces the time from a full day. That is to say, if she examined herself in the course of the previous day and discovered no blood, she was certainly ritually pure prior to that period of examination. In other words, she doesn't have to worry about anything before the 24-hour period. That's the compromise view between Hillel and Shammai. That's the halacha. The tuleka, va'ika, halacha l'maaseh. Halacha l'maaseh. A woman who does not have a fixed period and saw blood flow out, but didn't feel it begin to flow, is impure only the 24-hour period retroactively. If she examines herself within that period, she is retroactively impure from the time of the examination, as per the opinion of the rabbis. So, the Tuleka, the Gemara asks, Tuleka va'ika, Hillel omer lismoch, v'Shammai omer shelo lismoch. Kikama Ravuna Hechadeleka Plukta de Ravvata Bahadayu. The Gemara asks, and are there no more disputes between them? Isn't there what we learned that Hillel says that it is permitted to lay hands on the heads of the offerings sacrificed on a festival, and one performs no prohibited labor and does not desecrate a festival by doing so? Maybe laying the hands on the animal, as they used to do before they did the offering in the temple, was a violation of the Shabbos of the festival. And Shammai says not to lay the hands. The Gemara answers, when Rav Huna said his statement, he was referring to disputes when there is no dispute between the great sages who predated them, concomitant with others. The dispute with regard to laying hands on the festival is ancient, and their predecessors, sages, dating back to the beginning of the era of the pairs, already disputed it. V'ha'ika botzer lagatz. Shammai omer hochchar v'Hillel omer lo chukshar. Bar minei dahahi. Dahatam ka shatek le Hillel l'Shammai. The Gemara asks further, isn't there also that dispute with regard to one who harvests grapes in order to take them to the press and stomp them as to whether or not the liquid that seeps out from the grapes is considered as having seeped out willfully, intentionally, and renders the grape susceptible to impurity. In other words, the liquid that seeps out of the grapes to render the grape susceptible to impurity has to be something that the one who does it intends to do. If he doesn't intend to do it, it's not going to machshir l'tum, as they say. Machshir l'taros. So, Shammai says it has become susceptible, Hillel says it has not become susceptible. The Gemara rejects this, except for that one, as there, although they originally disagreed, ultimately Hillel was silent and did not respond to Shammai, and ultimately Hillel accepted Shammai's viewpoint. Yossi ben Yoezer ish tzreida, v'Yossi ben Yochanan ish Yerushalayim gazru tuma al eretz amim v'al klei zchuchit. That's the Mishnah. V'ha Rabbanan de shmonim shana gazor. V'ha Rabbanan de shmonim shana gazor. The Amar Rav Kahana k'shechala Rabbi Ishmael b'Rabbi Yosef shalchulo Rabbi emor lanu shnayim u'shlosha dvarim she'amarta mishum avicha. Earlier was mentioned that Yossi ben Yoezer of Tzreda and Yossi ben Yochanan of Jerusalem decreed impurity on the lands of the nations and upon glass vessels. The Gemara asks, in other words, outside of Israel, impure lands, and about because of the graves, like we said in the last class. And also glass vessels. Remember, we said it's not mentioned in the Torah. Glass vessels. It was a rabbinical decree to render the need to toivel, to immerse glass vessels before use. The Gemara asks, was it these two sages who were among the first sages of the era of the pairs, the Zugos, who issued these decrees? Wasn't it the sages who lived in the final 80 years of the Second Temple who issued these decrees? It wasn't the Zugos. It was a later period. As Rav Kahana said, when Rabbi Ishmael, son of Rabbi Yosef, fell ill, the sages said to him, Rabbi, tell us 2 or 3 statements that you once told in the name of your father. And then this is what Rabbi Yochanan sent back. Shalach lahem kach amar Abba, 180 shana ad shelo charav habayit pashta malchut harasha al Yisrael. 80 shana ad shelo charav habayit gazru tuma al eretz amim va'al klei zchuchit. 40 shana ad shelo charav habayit galta la Sanhedrin. וישבה לה בחנויות. מהי הלכתה? אמר רבי יצחק בר אבדימי לומר שלא דנו דיני קנסות. דיני קנסות סל כדתך? אמר אלא אימה שלא דנו דיני נפשות. He sent to them this. This is what my father said. 180 years before the temple was destroyed, the evil kingdom, meaning Rome, invaded Israel. 80 years before the temple was destroyed, they decreed impurity in the lands of the nations and on glass vessels. 40 years before the temple was destroyed, the Sanhedrin itself was exiled from the chamber of hewn stones, Lishkas Agazis, and they sat in the stores on the Temple Mount. Sat in the stores means there was an area on the Temple Mount called the stores. This is where the members of the Sanhedrin convened after they left the Lishkas Agazis, the chamber of hewn stones. With regard to the last statement, the Gemara asks, what are the halakhic ramifications of that statement? In the Gemara speak, you would say, Lamai Hilchata? Lamai Hilchata? What are the halakhic ramifications? What are the halakhic ramifications of what was just said? Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi said, to say that they no longer judged cases of fines, k'nasot. For instance, the law in the Bible, a man he entices a woman, whatever, and he shames her, and he has to pay the father, whatever, for bringing dishonor upon the family. He has to pay a monetary dispensation, whatever, depending on the case. And there's other, there's a lot of different ramifications of this. There's a law of shaming somebody in general. It's not dealing with a man or a woman, just any kind of thing. These kinds of fines. So Rabbi Yitzchak Bardini said that to say that the point is the halachic ramifications of this history lesson here is to say what? To say that they no longer judged cases of fines. After the destruction of the temple, there's a period that they still judged k'nasot, fines, and after a certain period of time, they no longer felt the Sanhedrin no longer assumed the authority of judging the fines. The Gemara wonders: does it enter your mind, that they no longer judged cases of fines? Even several generations after the temple was destroyed, they continued to judge cases of fines in Israel. Rather, amended. So when it says Ela, when you say in Hebrew, if you're learning Gemara, some of you are learning Gemara out there. And so it says, Dine knasa salcha datach. This is a question. Would it occur to you that such a thing is possible? Ele ema, and then when it says ele ema after that, it means rather amend it. Say it different. Say it, this is the way you should say it. That they no longer judged capital cases. The authority to impose the death penalty was stripped away from the Sanhedrin, and therefore they willingly left the chamber of hewn stone, Lishkas Agazit. Since the Sanhedrin no longer convenes in its designated place, the halacha is that it no longer has the authority to judge capital cases, and that's brought down in the Tosfos. So, and also the Rambam, and just from memory, the Rambam says that the Dina Nefeshos Rak Bifnei Abayit. So after the temple is destroyed, we no longer have the ability to judge capital offenses. Again, as I mentioned, in certain cases of a self-run Jewish community, if there's in the Shulchan Aruch brings certain cases where it may be possible to judge something. I don't want to get into it, but if there's a Jewish autonomy in the world, and then you better be careful of capital offenses, because depending on the community, they may actually, the Beit Din may have a way in the Shulchan Aruch to actually judge a capital case. However, I wouldn't go, nobody can take the law into their own hands. It has to be, there's due process. And of course, as I said before, tzedek yalinba. I mean, they always find that you're innocent until proven guilty. There has to be hard and fast proof that it's a capital offense. And the law is there's no more capital cases without the temple. Without the Sanhedrin, without the temple, there's no capital offenses. You could say that even there's a Dine Knasot is even suspended since the destruction of the temple, like we just said. So what does it matter that they're if you have the Shulchan Aruch that says that if a self-autonomous Jewish community that's not a problem with the governmental laws or anything, and there's an agreement among the Jews to judge Dine Knasot and Dine Nefashot in the land of Israel or outside of the land of Israel, whatever. Why not? If it's agreed upon by the community, and it's not contravening the laws of the state. If there's no problem with it, why not judge a capital case or force fines for serious offenses? Why does the Sanhedrin have to be in the Lishkat Gazid? Very simply, Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah dvar Adonai Yerushalayim. There's something about, if the Sanhedrin is not in the place that the Torah wants it to be, on the Temple Mount, in the Lishkat Gazit, in the chamber of hewn stones, then there's something about Hamakom Gorem. It says a number of times in the Talmud and all the Sfarim, Hamakom Gorem. The place brings it about. There's a special quality, a divine power of the very place that allows the power of a true judgment at all levels of truth to go out to the world. Next, V'kitema b'shmonim shana nami iten hu ahavu. So in the case we learned that the sages of the last 80 years before the destruction of the temple are the ones who decreed impurity on the lands of the nations. If you want, say that Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan were also there during those 80 years. If you want to say that, wasn't it also taught in the Breita that Hillel and his son Shimon, in the Lashon Vatanya, Hillel v'Shimon Gamliel v'Shimon nahagu nesiutan Lifnei Abayit Mea Shana. Oh, another version, Nahagu Nisiotan Habayit Lif Mea Shana. Ve'ilu Yossi ben Yoezer Ish Tzreda Ve'Yossi ben Yochanan Havo Kadmi Tuva. So, if you say that Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan were also there during those 80 years, wasn't it taught in the Breita that Hillel and his son Shimon and his grandson Gamliel, his great-grandson Shimon, filled their positions of Nasi before the house while the temple was standing? Even after the destruction, there was still the Sanhedrin and there was still the Nasi, but there were 10 places that the Sanhedrin was exiled to. First in the stores, and then in Yavne, and so on and so forth, until the last one in Tiberia. So it was 100 years after the destruction of the temple, we still had a full-fledged Sanhedrin. And then 100 or 200 perhaps years later, they decided to formally disband, and it was just the exilarch had his own authority, and the sages of Eretz Yisrael had their authority, which was very respected, of course, by the Babylonian Jews. Jews living in Babylonia. So what's the deal? If there was the Sanhedrin, the Nasi was in effect, meaning the Sanhedrin in effect, and the president of the head would lasted for 100 years. Well, Yossi ben Yoezer Tzreda, and Yossi ben Yochanan were much earlier than Hillel. Ela atzu inu gazor agushud lisrof va'avira velo klum. Va'atu rabbanan dishmonim shana gazor avira litlot. Rather, the decree was issued in stages. First, Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan came and issued the decree that Truma comes into contact with a clump of earth in the land of the nations to be burned. They decreed nothing with regard to Truma, that, in other words, Truma that touches a clump of earth from outside of Israel is pasul and has to be burnt. But they decreed nothing with regard to the air space of the land of the nations. Only the ground, it's not the air. So if the Truma never touched the ground, what's the problem? The sages of the final 80 years prior to the destruction of the temple came and issued a decree with regards to Truma that enters into even the airspace of the land of the nations, that its legal status is in abeyance and is not burned. Litzlot, it's in abeyance, meaning it's undecided. You can't do anything with it. It's in limbo. You don't burn it, you don't use it. Nobody can eat it. Just tie it up respectfully and leave it somewhere. Put it up on your shelf next to your books or your whatever. So lememra dechada gezerta hava l'sreifa va'amar ilfa yadayim tchilat gezeratan yadayim tchilat gezeratan l'sreifa yadayim hu ditchilat gezeratan l'sreifa ha midiachrina lo. The Gemara asks, is that to say that there was one decree issued immediately to subject Truma, tithe produce, to be burned? Didn't Ilfa say with regard to hands, from the beginning of the decree was that Truma comes into contact with them is to be burned? The Gemara, wasn't that the decree? The Gemara infers from that with regard to hands alone, the beginning of the decree was to render Truma that came into contact with the impure to the point of burning. However, with regard to other matters, they did not immediately issue a severe decree. Ela atu inu gazor agusha litlot va'avira velo klum. Va'atu rabbanan dishmonim shana gazor agusha lisrof va'avira litlot. Rather, here are the stages. Yosef ben Yoezer and Yosef ben Yochanan came and decreed that any item that came into contact with a clump of earth from outside of Israel to be in abeyance. It floats. And they decreed nothing with regard to Truma that enters into the airspace of the land of the nations. The sages of the last 80 years came and were stringent, one more level. They decreed that Truma that came into contact with a clump of earth of land of the nations to be burned. With regard to Truma that enters into the airspace of the land of the nations to be put in abeyance, not to be burnt. Va'akti ba'usha gazur d'tanan al shisha spekot sorfin et Truma al safek beta pras val safek afar haba me'eretz amim val safek bigdei ama aretz val safek kelim animtzain val safek harukin val safek meraglayim adam shekeneged meraglei behema va'al vadai maga'an va'al safek tumatan sorfin et Truma. The Gemara asks further, and still, is it clear? Didn't the sages issue a decree in Usha? Many years after the destruction of the temple, as we learned in the Mishnah, in 6 cases of uncertain impurity, one burns Truma. Here, the 6 cases of Safek Truma. Safek, case of a Beta Pras, meaning the Truma that entered a field where a grave was plowed, and the location of the bones of the corpse are unknown, and it's uncertain whether or not the Truma became impure. And from the uncertain, that's 1. 2, an uncertain case of earth coming from the land of the nations, whose impurity itself has the status of a safek tuma, uncertain impurity. Therefore, truma that came into contact with it also has the status of uncertain impurity. From the uncertain case of the clothes of an Amaretz, since Amaretz, somebody is not careful with regard to the laws of purity, we are concerned lest a menstruating woman touches clothes. The Talmidei Chachamim were very careful of not letting a menstruating woman touch his clothes, together with all the laws of purity. So, due to that uncertainty, the clothes of a non-learned Jew, or a Jew who is not careful of the laws of Truma and tithes and purity, what we call the Am Haaretz, they considered his clothing impure. And that's the third one. Fourth one, Suffolk, on certain cases of vessels that are not his, that are found. The person finds a vessel, you don't know whose it was, so you don't know if it's pure or impure. Since you didn't know if Truma came into contact with it, there's uncertainty whether or not they're impure. And there's the suffix of rok, spittle, in the Lashon Baal Safek Harukin. Safek Harukin is the uncertain case of saliva. If a person perhaps the spittle is a zav, transmits impurity of Torah law. You see some saliva somewhere. Is it pure or impure? You don't know. If the truma, and there was some saliva on the food, and it happened to be truma, came into contact with it, it may or might not be impure. So they made a decree. The Yisrael decrees again that it becomes, because of the suffix, direct suffix, it's impure. So from the uncertain case of a person's urine, even though it's adjacent to the urine of an animal. So the urine of an animal is pure, urine of a human being impure. Okay? So maybe impure, maybe not. So even there's room for concern. Perhaps it was the urine of a zav. If somebody has a zav, his urine is impure by Torah laws, deraitis, right there in the black and white in the Bible. If the truma came into contact with it, there's an uncertainty whether it's impure. In all these cases, the sage is established for the definite contact when it is clear that he came into contact with the truma, and although there's an uncertainty with regard to their essential impurity, that is to say, uncertainty whether or not they're pure or impure, one burns the truma that came into contact with them. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Af al safek maga'an b'rshut yachid sorfin. V'chachamim omrim b'rshut yachid tolin b'rshut rabim torin. Rabbi Yossi said, even in the case of uncertain contact, if it was in the private domain, one burns the truma. And the rabbis say, since these cases are only impure by rabbinic decree, in the case of a suffix in the private domain, suffix tuma, b'rshut yachid, an uncertain case of impurity in the private domain, one does not burn the truma. If something impure touched truma in a private domain, you're not sure whether it's pure or impure, the substance that the tithe came into contact with, you put it in abeyance, litzlot. In the public domain, they're ritually pure. So suffix truma, truma, for instance, tithe produce, you find it in the public domain. It's wrapped up and it says truma on it, or whatever. Or you even know who's it. He says, that's my truma. Oh, it has spit on it. He said, are there any zavs in the town? They can walk around. Anybody have gonorrhea around here? But you want to do it modestly. You don't want to embarrass anybody too much. But in those days, they actually would know. It's in order to people weren't as people who respected the law. They would make it known, and they would act in a certain way. And if somebody asked, they'd tell them. They wouldn't want to mess up anybody's law. So the rabbis say, since all these cases are impure by rabbinic decree, in the case of uncertain contact in the private domain, what doesn't burn the truma? Rather, tolin. It's in abeyance. In the public domain, tahor. So in the case of he finds truma in the public domain, you don't know. It may or may not have been touched by a zav or any other thing that would make it impure. You assume that it is pure. V'amar ula elu shisha svekot b'usha itkinu. Ela atu inu gazor agusha litzlot v'avira v'lo chlum. V'atu rabbanan d'shmonim shana gazor. Idi v'idi litzlot. V'atu b'usha gazor agusha lisrof v'avira kidekai kai. Ula said with regard to these 6 uncertain cases in Usha, they instituted that one must act in terms of practical halacha. If so, a clump of earth from the land outside of Israel into the nation transmits impurity from the time of the Usha ordinances and not from the 80 years prior to the destruction of the temple. The Usha ordinances were after the destruction and the 80 years were before. Rather, so the clump of earth was actually an Usha decree, and it wasn't from before the destruction. Rather, Yossi ben Yozer and Yossi ben Yochanan came and decreed that if Truma came into contact with a clump of earth from the land of the nations, its legal status is in abeyance, and one does not burn it. And upon Truma that entered the airspace of the land of the nations, they decreed nothing whatsoever. And the sages of the last 80 years of the temple came along. The sages in the last years of 80 years before the destruction came along and issued a decree upon this earth and upon that air. And in both cases, the Truma is in abeyance. Totally. And the sages of the city of Usha came along and decreed that Truma that came into contact with a clump of earth from the land of the nations is burned, and Truma that entered the airspace of the land of the nations, as it stood, it continues to stand in abeyance. They did not pose any greater stringency on the matter. Kleis chuchit my taima gazor behu rabbanan tuma amar Rabbi Yochanan amar Reish Lakish utchilat briatan minachol shavinu rabbanan kichle cheres el elemeata lo te'e le'en ta'ara b'mikvah al matanan ve'elu chotzesinu kelim hazefet v'amor bichleis chuchit. One of the matters mentioned above was the decree of impurity on glass vessels. Glass vessels, what's the reason the sages decreed impurity upon them? Rabbi Yochanan said, the Reish Lakish said, since the beginning of the manufacture of the glass vessels is from the sand, glass comes from sand, the sages equated them to earthenware vessels, which also come from the earth, sand from the earth, and clay from the earth. So they equated the law. The Gemara asks, what if you say, but if what you say is true, if the sages truly equated the impurity of glass vessels to the impurity of earthenware vessels, then there shouldn't be purification in the ritual bath for glass vessels. Then the mikveh shouldn't work to purify glass vessels, just as there's no purification for earthenware vessels. You can't make a clay vessel, an earthenware vessel, pure from immersing it into a mikveh. So let's say that's true with glass, because they both come from the earth. Why then did we learn in a Mishnah with regard to the halachot of immersing vessels, and these materials interposed in the vessels? That means, if they were stuck to the vessel when it was immersed, and the vessel is purified, pitch and the myrrh. In other words, if there's something that does chatzitza, when you toivel kelim, when you buy a new vessel, dishes and whatnot, or kitchenware, foods used for food, you have to immerse them in a mikveh in order for them to be pure. It's called it's a law of Gilui Goyim. So we learn it from the Midianites. If you review the Bible and the whole situation between the children of Israel and the Midianites, that's where we learn the whole laws of Torah and Kelim. So one of the laws is for any mikveh, except for Tfilat Ezra, but for a woman immersing and for vessels, there can't be anything stuck to, and a man, it should be for a man too, really. There shouldn't be anything stuck to the person or object being immersed. Shouldn't be a sticker or a clump, but specifically the Gemara says pitch, asphalt or a piece of gum, I don't know, a sticker, or myrrh, some kind of sticky food, or fragrance. Myrrh is a perfume material. So in other words, that Gemara asks, why did we learn in the Mishnah with regard to the halachot of immersing vessels and these materials interpose on the vessels? There's chatzitza. If they were stuck to the vessel, it doesn't. There's no tefillah. Doesn't work. The pitch and the myrrh that were stuck in glass vessels obstruct the immersion. Apparently, glass vessels are purified in a ritual bath, because that when it talks about chatzitza with zefet v'mor, pitch and myrrh, that's discussing also glass vessels. So there's a contradiction. Hachabamaiskinan kagon shenikvu v'hitif l'tochan avar. But Rabbi Meir damar hakol holech achar hama'amid. Tanya kleis chuchit shenikvu v'hitif l'tochan avar with an aleph, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Meir, Metame v'chachami Metari. The Gemara answers, glass cannot usually be purified in a ritual bath. However, what are we dealing with here? I mean, nowadays, halacha l'maaseh, we do toivel glass, I guess without a bracha. I would check that. I have to make sure, but we do toivel glass. Whether I check whether it's with a bracha or without a bracha, but we do put it in the ritual bath, glassware. So, a special case where the glass vessel is perforated. Here it's this. What we're talking about? We're talking about a special case. The glass vessel had a hole in it, and he dripped molten lead into the hole to seal the hole. They used to do this in ancient times all the time. This halacha is, and still today, this halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who said everything follows the nature of the facilitator. Hakol halech achar ha'ma'amid. That is to say, if an object that is not fit for use on its own is reinforced with a different material that facilitates its use, the entire object assumes the legal status of that material. Therefore, since the substance that seals the holes in these glass vessels is lead, which can be purified through immersion like other materials, lead is a metal, and it is purified through immersion, right? And that's the ma'amid. If that's holding the vessel together, it's a ma'amid. I don't know if it's just one hole in a glass plate and you put some lead in it. Okay, you could still use the plate maybe, but if anything would drip out of it, you don't want a plate with a hole in it. So the filling up the hole is a ma'amid. It's causing it to be a decent plate. Remember, a vessel is incomplete and it doesn't work. It's not considered a vessel and it can't become impure. It has to be a complete vessel. One of the four categories of what makes something a vessel. One of them, complete. It can't be incomplete and unusable. But we're talking, what's the ma'amid? What's the facilitator? So, as it is taught in the Breita, glass vessels that were perforated and one dripped lead into them, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said that Rabbi Meir deemed them ritually impure, and the rabbi said they're pure. The halacha here is like the rabbis. Ele me'ata, the Gemara asks further, halacha l'maaseh, today in the Shulchan Aruch it says, in Rambam actually, in Rambam Sefer Torah it says, although the glass vessels did not become impure by Torah law, the sages agreed that they become impure. The rationale for this is as follows. Since glass is produced from sand, like earthenware vessels, the sages agree that they made the gezerah that it should become impure just like them. However, unlike earthenware vessels, glass vessels become impure from both their airspace, meaning if it's like a jug, or a cup even, they become, if you hang a sheretz, a tarantula or whatever, a dead tarantula, into the airspace of a glass vessel, the sages say that also makes it impure, just like a earthenware vessel, even though it doesn't touch. Just being in the airspace, it goes down on its one of the Shmona Shratzim, and there's rabbinic laws that include more animals than the 8 mentioned in the Torah. Whatever it goes on its web and it goes down into the earthenware or the glassware vessel and it dies within the airspace and it's dry as a bone. The vessel is impure, no longer pure. So, although the sages decreed ritual impurity on glass vessels, again, that's not, glass is a rabbinic law, not by the Torah. It wouldn't make it impure. But the sages decreed on glass vessels, and as that is so, it was not to the extent that truma and consecrated items that came into contact with them are burned, rather they are placed in abeyance. That's the Rambam. Elimata lo litmu migaban al matanan klei cheres v'klei neter tumatan shaveh mitamin umatamin me'avirehen umitamin me'achoreyen ve'en mitamin migabeyen ushviratan mataratan klei neter klei cheres hu detumatan hu klei neter klei cheres hu detumatan shaveh again, klei neter v'klei cheres hu detumatan shaveh aval midei acharina lo amri kevan dechi nishtabru yesh lehen takana Shavinu kichle matachol. So, the Gemara asks, but if so, the glass vessels are equated to earthenware vessels, they should not become impure from their outer side. The law is with an earthenware vessel that something that's a tuma that touches it on the outside, even if it doesn't go inside it, makes the vessel impure. Why then? And that's not true of the glass vessel. So why we should say the same for glass, but it isn't. So why then do we learn this in the Mishnah with regards to the earthenware vessels and vessels made from neter? It's neter, natron, by sodium carbonate. It's also found in crystal form. When you mix it with mortar, the vessels form these crystals, and these vessels couldn't be used. They could not be used to hold liquids, but in a dry climate, it's conceivable that they could hold liquids for a limited period of time. So klei cheres and klei neter, the halachot or natron, the laws of their impurity are equal in that they become impure if a primary source of impurity enters their airspace, and once impure, they render food that enters their airspace impure from their airspace, and they become impure from behind. That is to say, if a primary source of impurity enters into the bottom of the vessel, where there is an empty space in a receptacle, the vessel becomes impure. However, earthenware vessels do not become impure from their outside. Meaning, if a primary source of impurity came into contact with the outer side of the vessel, the inside of the vessel does not become impure. And the breaking of earthenware vessels renders them pure. You have a clay jug, it's impure, and it breaks, it's pure. The shards are pure. By inference, specifically natron vessels, and earthenware vessels are those whose halachot of impurity are equal. However, with regard to other matters, not the case. So why then were glass vessels not listed together with the other vessels? The Gemara answers, since if the glass vessel broke, they can be repaired. You just heat it up, the glazer can fix it. But the neter, the metal vessel is not so simple. Natron was a difficult material to work with and to fix. So for that reason, glass was equated with clay. Ele me'ata yachsuru l'tumatan yishana ki clay matachot etanan clay matachot pshuten mukableyan tmein nishperu taru chazar v'asa mehen kelim chazur l'tumatan yishana ve'ilu gabe clay zchuchit tanan clay etz uchlay or uchlay etzem uchlay zchuchit pshuteyan torin mukableyan tmein nishperu taru nishperu taru Chazar v'asa mem kelim mekabdim tuna mikan laba in. Slicha, I got to read it properly. One thing Rabbi Soloveitchik of blessed memory in Yeshiva University got really upset about is that if he asked people to read and they could not properly read the Gemara, he would not ever call on them to read again. Perhaps that's Rabbi Bravender taught us that. Or perhaps Rabbi Schrader, who was in the Rav's chair, and that's what he would. If you couldn't read the Gemara in class, you were not so considered. You have to at least be able to read the Gemara properly. I have it here with vowels and punctuation, and let's try it again. Ve'ilu gabe klei zchuchit tanan, klei etz uchlei or klei etzem uchlei zchuchit pshuteyan tohorin u'makableyan tumein nishperu taru chazar v'asa mehen kelim mekablin tuma mikan ulaba in l'mafreya lo. The Gemara asked, if so, if glass vessels are equated with metal vessels, then broken glass vessels that were liquefied and recast should resume their previous state of impurity, like metal vessels. And we learned in the Mishnah, metal vessels, both in their flat vessels, which have no airspace, and their receptacles, which have an airspace, they're all impure if they came into contact with the primary source of ritual impurity. If they broke, they thereby became purified. However, if one remade the broken vessels into new vessels, they reassume their previous impurity. Well, with regard to glass vessels, we learned in the Mishnah, wooden vessels and leather vessels and bone vessels and glass vessels, flat vessels are pure. In other words, with no vessel of nowhere, they can't contain anything. They're flat, but they're still vessels. The flat vessels are pure when they came into contact with tuma, and only their receptacles are impure. If they broke, they thereby became purified. So breaking wood, leather, bone, glass vessels. They're broken, they become pure. You can use the pieces somehow in a state of purity. However, if you remade the broken vessels to new vessels, then they become impure from that point on, when they were recast. By inference from that point forward, yes, they become impure. Retroactively, no, they did not reassume their previous impurity. Apparently, there's no halacha of previous impurity. I guess that's Tuma Yeshana, as far as glass vessels are concerned. Tumat Kli Zchut Rabbanan v'Tuma Yeshana D'Rabbanan. Betuma D'Oraita Achitu Ba Rabbanan Tuma, Betuma D'Rabbanan Lo Achitu La Rabbanan Tuma. Gemara answers, the entire impurity of glass vessels is D'Rabbanan. The previous impurity, like taking a broken metal vessel and making it and fixing it and making it a vessel again, it broke and you made it into a vessel again. It's still impure, it's still tamid by D'Rabbanan. With regard to impurity by Torah law, the sages imposed a decree of previous impurity. With regard to impurity by rabbinic law, the sages did not oppose a decree of previous impurity, Tuma Yeshana. The sages did not oppose these decrees of previous impurity, which is by rabbinic decree on glass vessels, whose fundamental impurity is itself only by rabbinic decree. So we're just going to get to the next page. Pshutehen miha litma daha pshutek lemetachot deraitaninu avde v'hurabanan heker ki hechi delo lisrof alayu truma v'kodashim. The Gemara asks further, their flat vessels should in any case become impure. Since the impurity of flat metal vessels is by Torah law, isn't it appropriate therefore to decree that impurity on flat glass vessels is a d'Rabbanan, by a Rabbanan law? Shouldn't they be impure? The Gemara answers, the sages made a distinction with regard to glass vessels in order to prevent burning truma and consecrated items from coming into contact with them. Though this distinction between glass vessels and metal vessels, through this distinction between glass vessels and metal vessels, everyone will understand that the impurity of glass vessels is not by Torah law, d'oraita. They will not come to burn truma and consecrated items that came in contact with them, with the impure glass vessels, and as such their legal status will remain in abeyance. Rav Ashi Amar le'olam lechli cheres damu udeka kasha lach la litmu migaban huil v'nireh tocho kavaro. Read that again. Rav Ashi Amar le'olam lechli cheres damu udeka kasha lach lo litma migaban huil v'nireh tocho kavaro. Rav Ashi said there was never need to equate glass and metal vessels. Actually, glass vessels, there are likens to earthenware vessels in every sense. And that which is difficult for you, if so, glass vessels, that's difficult for you. But like other earthenware vessels, if that's difficult for you, then if so, then glass vessels, like other earthenware vessels, should not become impure from contact of their outer side with a source of ritual impurity. Since in glass vessels, its inner side looks like its outer side. Tochel kavaro. The legal status of the outer side was equated with the legal status of the inner side by rabbinic decree, as there is no visible separation between them, because it's translucent or clear. There might be a question between translucent glass and clear glass. Let's say it's talking about clear glass. That requires further study. Don't take my word for it. Let's finish with halacha l'maisa. Flat vessels, since its inside looks like its outside. Says in the Rambam, Sefer Torah Hilchos Kelim, chapter 1. The decree of impurity on glass vessels is based on the manufacture of glass from sand, which led to their legal status to be equated to that of earthenware vessels. Nevertheless, unlike earthenware vessels, they became impure both from the inside and from the outside. I bless you all that your insides should be like your outsides and your outsides should be like your insides. In other words, be transparent. Don't think one thing and act another way. Don't act one way and think another way. Just, this is called the emes. And even greater than emes is shalom. Be emistic, be shalomdik, and be well.